Hi, my name is Ben, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Ascend Finance. Ascend's goal is to take complex bankruptcy terms and put them into simple, human, understandable language. Understanding the differences between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy can be one of the most confusing topics. It is also possibly one of the most crucial things to understand. The goal of Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy is to provide you debt relief from your debt, often in the form of debt forgiveness or discharge. But each option go about it very differently. Why is understanding the differences between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy so important? One option takes much longer, 3 or 5 years, and that same option costs 3 times as much. In this video, we will cover Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 bankruptcy overview, the cost of Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, the length of time of Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, how your credit report and credit score are impacted, the pros and cons of both Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, a simple way to understand Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and an answer or some insights to this question of whether you should file. And the answer to that question is ultimately yours. And yes, we will talk about that more. Now, you're probably looking at this list and thinking, how am I going to get through all of this content? The last thing I would want to do is listen to a video of me speaking for over 10 minutes. So we added chapters below so you can skip around to what's most relevant to you. Before we begin, I also want to tell you that your situation is unique. My goal is to answer all your questions, but if I don't, please comment below and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Also, if this is helpful, I'd love if you could subscribe to this video or like it, because these are both really encouraging to us and very motivating to produce additional content. So let's start with the Chapter 7, Chapter 13 bankruptcy overview. The best way I think I can do this is to describe some of the differences between both options. In Chapter 7 bankruptcy, it's quite fast. You can receive your discharge in as little as 4 months. It's also less expensive. It's one of the least expensive debt relief options. That said, you may lose assets, such as a house or a car, but many people do not by using what's called bankruptcy exemptions. Often, it's a flat attorney fee, and that's often paid before filing. And the total filing cost is $338. Now, with Chapter 7 bankruptcy, qualification is often based on your income, household size, and the state in which you live. Our Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 calculator below in the description helps you estimate both of these things. Now, in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, it is quite slow. Discharge often takes 36 or 60 months. It is often more expensive than a Chapter 7 bankruptcy by as much as 3 times. That said, you can often keep your assets such as your home and car. The attorney fee is also a flat fee, and sometimes that fee is paid 100% in the plan, or some paid before the plan and in the plan. The total filing fee is often $313, and no qualification is necessary as long as your debt is within the Chapter 13 debt limits. And just as at the time of this video, the debt limits is $419,275 in unsecured debt. So as long as you have underneath that, you may be able to qualify for a Chapter 13. So how much does Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy cost? Understanding the cost is hugely important in bankruptcy, and there is a major difference here between Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Make sure you understand how the fees work to help make you the most informed. So we built a Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 calculator, and I included a link to the description below, and that will estimate the costs, the all-in costs based on your zip code. It will also estimate your qualification, compare pros and cons, and also the costs and duration of your bankruptcy alternatives. So here's how the costs work. In Chapter 7 bankruptcy, there's often a flat bankruptcy attorney fee ranging from $1,000 to $2,500, which also sometimes includes the filing fee of $338. make sure to ask the bankruptcy attorney on the consultation whether the fee quoted includes the filing cost. In a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, most attorneys take an upfront payment for their retainer fee, and they will include the rest in the plan. Some attorneys take the entire fee in the plan. The cost of a Chapter 13 bankruptcy can be between $2,500 and $6,000. Like I said, it can be cost 3 times as much. One of the least understood Chapter 13 fees is the trustee fee. Our calculator below takes that into consideration, but the fee is based on a percentage and it's based in your plan. Just for reference, the Chapter 13 trustee fee can also equate to thousands of dollars, so it's important to be aware of those fees and understand how they are going to cost you. So I want to give you an example of a specific instance because I think that understanding the cost is really important. Let's take this real life example of someone I've been chatting with recently in Alabama. I'll call her Jane, but that's not her real name. Jane came to us because her Chapter 13 bankruptcy was about to get dismissed. Dismissal is not the goal in bankruptcy. Dismissal basically means that the creditors can come after you again for your unpaid debt. I asked Jane some probing questions and found out that the only reason she filed Chapter 13 bankruptcy was because the bankruptcy attorney said she could either pay $300 down and $120 a month for 3 years, or $1,300 up front for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. She couldn't afford the Chapter 7 attorney fee up front, so she decided on Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Let's quickly do the math. She could pay $3,900 over 3 years or $1,300 up front. I'm still not sure why the bankruptcy attorney didn't allow her to make a $300 payment up front and then do the payments for the rest of the payment before she filed, but that's a story for another time. So instead, Jane paid $300 down for a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and then about 10 months of her planned payment of $120 per month. So she paid a total of $1,500, which is more than she would have paid if she would have done the Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And unfortunately, Jane did not get any debt relief because her case was dismissed, or very little debt relief. What could have Jane done instead? In this situation, Jane could have gotten another bankruptcy consultation and asked whether the attorney would take payments before filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Many attorneys will take payments for Chapter 7 bankruptcy as long as the fees are paid before the Chapter 7 bankruptcy is filed. So, as I said, cost is very important, and understanding how much you're going to have to pay and whether the bankruptcy attorney takes payments is crucial. Our free calculator below estimates those numbers based on your zip code, or you can reach out to me directly and I can give you an estimate based on where you live. So now, the next major question is, how long does Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy take to receive debt freedom? In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you can get debt relief in the form of a discharge often in as little as 4 months. With a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, it can often take 36 or 60 months to receive that debt relief. Now, 36 months and 60 months are vastly different lengths sometimes. So who decides whether you have to wait 36 months or 60 months in a Chapter 13? It's actually based on your income in comparison to the median income in your area. We take that consideration in our Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 calculator estimate. Now, let's go ahead and cover how your credit score and credit report are impacted in both Chapter 13 and Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Another common question is how credit score and credit report are impacted. Many people lump credit report and credit scores into one bucket, and they are very similar, but I'm going to discuss with you how both of them work in a Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy. In regards to your credit report, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy is on your credit report for 10 years. A Chapter 13 bankruptcy is on your credit report for 7 years. You can often get access to credit much sooner than waiting those years. Some people that we've worked with have talked about getting secured credit cards within months of filing Chapter 13 or Chapter 13 or Chapter 7 bankruptcy. So just so you know, it's on your credit report for many years, but as time goes by, many people have access to credit actually sooner. In regards to your credit score may drop in both a Chapter 7 and a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. That said, one attorney we work with has said that your credit score could actually increase after filing a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and that it really depends on your credit score starting point. So potentially if your credit score is high, your credit score might go down. If your credit score is low, your credit score might go up. You may be wondering how soon you can buy a house or buy a car after bankruptcy. And these are really important questions. So I included a link below to how bankruptcy affects your credit and the answer to those questions so that you can kind of prepare for the future after filing bankruptcy. Now, let's go ahead and cover the pros and cons of both Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy. These are really important because just to understand some of the cons and pros, and we discussed a few of them potentially already, but I want to really help you understand which ones are which. So we'll start with Chapter 7 bankruptcy. In a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, one of the pros is that it is less expensive than a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and also less expensive than most of the alternatives such as debt settlement and debt management. Another pro is the speed of which you get discharged. Like I said before, you can often get relief from your debt within as little as 4 months. Another pro is that you can often keep property such as your home or vehicle as long as they are below the bankruptcy exemptions. Bankruptcy exemptions is a whole nother story. So I'm going to put a link to an article below that covers bankruptcy exemptions specifically. Another thing, it stops debt collection lawsuits. Now, debt collection lawsuits are very common in the United States. So it basically puts an automatic stay on and that you will no longer get those types of correspondences. Another pro is that you have no more deficiencies. Now, let's cover the cons. One con is that there are income requirements. Many people have to qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. There is a chance that you could lose property in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy if your bankruptcy exemptions do not cover all of the equity in so let's say your home. Another thing is there is negative credit score and credit report impact, especially credit report impact. Maybe we kind of discussed that in a Chapter 7, your credit score could go up, but there's definitely impact to your credit report. Another con is there is non-dischargeable debt. Often student loans and some of the secured debts are not dischargeable in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Finally, another con is that it is more difficult in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy to avoid foreclosure, which is why many people file Chapter 13 bankruptcy to stop foreclosure. There are other pros and cons, but I wanted to highlight some of the bigger ones. But let's go ahead and talk about Chapter 13 bankruptcy pros and cons. One of the pros of Chapter 13 bankruptcy is that you can save your home. Chapter 13 bankruptcy can stop foreclosure and allow you to catch up on some of your payments that are in arrears. Another pro is that there is some potential favorable dealing with a second mortgage, specifically on your home. Another pro is that there's some potential favorable discharge of tax debts, dealing with tax debts. There's a specific basically a specific guidelines that have to be set, but there is some potential favorable discharge of tax debt. Another pro is that it can help with your car payments to catch up on car payments. Another pro is that it can also help with domestic support payments in arrears. And finally, Chapter 13 bankruptcy can also help stop eviction in certain situations. Let's talk about the cons. Similar to Chapter 7 bankruptcy, there is a negative credit score and credit report impact. There are also higher attorney fees like we had discussed earlier. There's low payment flexibility. You get some payment flexibility when you do debt settlement, if you need to miss a payment or something like that, but you don't get that same payment flexibility in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy or is more difficult to do. There's a process by which you get that payment flexibility. And another con is the length of time, where Chapter 7 bankruptcy can last 4 months. A Chapter 13 bankruptcy can be 36 or 60 months, which is a lot longer. There's a lot of information on pros and cons. So I also included a link to our blog post covering the Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy pros and cons in more detail than we discussed on this video. Now, let me share a simple way to understand Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy, or to remember the two different options. I came up with this option recently, and I hope that it's beneficial to you. It took me a long time to understand which one is which, so hopefully this little hack will help you understand the differences. First, 7 is a smaller number than 13, so you can remember that Chapter 7 is less expensive than Chapter 13. Second, 7 is also a shorter number than 13, so you can remember that Chapter 7 is often much shorter than Chapter 13 bankruptcy in terms of duration. Finally, the question that you probably want answered is, should you file for Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy? Deciding whether to file bankruptcy is ultimately your decision, and your situation is unique. Please add a comment below or take the Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 bankruptcy calculator in the description to help you be the most informed, to make the most informed decision for you. No one can make this decision except for you, and you are going to be the best person to make that decision. Did you learn something from this video? Please click the link below to subscribe if it's been helpful. And finally, I'd like to turn it over to you. What are some questions that you have about filing Chapter 13 or Chapter 7 bankruptcy? I'd love to answer any questions that you have, and I'll do my best to respond as quickly as possible. Thanks so much for watching.